Okay, so what I want to talk about now is communication, or the art of communication, okay? So the definition of communication that I'm going with is a successful conveying or sharing of ideas and feelings to win friends and influence people with ecology and congruency, okay? So communication is just that, okay? To make relationships, to nurture relationships, to maintain and sustain relationships, okay? And as a consequence, you know, we may want to influence people to maybe work together to achieve a certain outcome, or we may not want anything from them, right, other than just their company, okay? But communication is key to share ideas, all right? There's a really potent study that was done called the Blue Zone study, all right, which leans into the importance of how areas that have high concentrations of people that live over 100 and areas of high concentration where people die very young have one common thing, and that is community. Now community is commune, right? Communication is commune, right? It's the same mechanic, right? Communication creates community. With a breakdown in communication, there is no community, okay? So first of all, is the element of commune is really important that you understand that. In martial arts, when we express communication, we are expressing it using combative expression, okay? Our language is the combat tools that we're using, okay? When we're expressing ourselves in full combat mode, okay? Now in that communication, there is a sender, right? So if your opponent is aggressing you, they are sending a message. They are sending a message, they're aggressing you, or they're about to attack you, or they are in the midst of an attack, okay? On the flip side, let's say somebody's aggressing me, I am the receiver. So I'm receiving the message. So I need to make sure that I'm alert and aware in order to receive that message as early as possible. If I receive that message late, the first time I hear that message or receive that message is with a thump, okay? That's not the best time to learn that somebody's trying to send you a message. So you want to receive the message as early as possible that somebody's aggressing or attacking you. Then what you do is you acknowledge that message. So you internally process that message, right? What you're going to do about it, right? Now we talk about in the last teaching about confidence and the 4 stages of learning, okay? And we talk about getting into a state of unconscious competence. You want to be in a position where you have practiced your art to a state of competency or even mastery, that your response is then autonomous. So you then not only acknowledge, but you also then respond. Now there's 2 ways to respond, right? One way is what I call the primal reaction. This is an untrained response, usually a dumb response, because it's, you know, what everybody comes into a class with, nothing in their pocket, okay? They've got no tools, it's whatever would come naturally. It would be their knee-jerk reaction, their flinch response, and so on. The second type of response is what I refer to as an intelligent response. This is a pre-programmed, trained response. When you see something coming, you respond to it in a certain way. And as you respond to it in a certain way, it is a clearly computed, calculated, practiced response. But you're not thinking about it, it's just happening like that, okay? And you want to get into that state where it's just happening naturally, okay? Now, if somebody was aggressing me and I was to say cover or cower, what does that say? What does that say about me? In my communication to my opponent, it says, I'm not ready, or I'm behind the curve, or I do not want conflict, okay? But if somebody was to aggress and I see it, receive that message, acknowledge that message, and all of a sudden, right, intercept that with a straight lead all of a sudden, intercepting my opponent's attack, that shows a flip message that I'm not going to stand here and take that, okay? I'm not going to stand here and take the abuse or the attack that you're throwing in my direction. I'm going to fight back, okay? So my language changes, but it also shows that I'm ahead of the curve. Now, in order to be ahead of the curve, it all depends on how quickly can you process. How well have you trained yourself to respond intelligently? Do you have those tools in your back pocket to be able to use them as second nature? They are autonomously deployed, or you have to think about it. Conscious thought is a lot slower than unconscious thought, so it must be in the tank. And there's a really, key teaching when it comes to communication, and that is the meaning of the message is in the feedback you get, okay? So we're going to start to apply this to daily life, okay? In daily life, if you're communicating with somebody, let's say you say something to somebody and all of a sudden they seem offended, but you didn't mean to offend them, clearly you've said something that's upset them and they've interpreted it in that way because they've got their own map of the world going on in their mind, right? They might have had a really hard day. They might have lost a loved one, right? They might have lost their job. They might have just been told the news they've got some terminal disease, right? You don't know what battle somebody's fighting. So based on their map of the world, they might have interpreted your message in that way. Now, if you're not able to read what's going on there, right, and then start to go into auto-correction, not like the auto-correction on your mobile phones, which is fairly rubbish, right? But auto-correct using intelligence to help understand what's going on, you can start to draw out that information, right? And start to recorrect that and redivert that, okay? That communication's happening all the time with people. Sometimes we upset people inadvertently, we don't mean to, it's not our intention, but we say something, sometimes joyfully, some innocently, with purity, and somebody gets upset, but we don't know why, right? So, but we can get down to the root of that, okay? And other times, you do mean to do it, so you've got an intention behind that, okay? So, the feedback of the meaning of the message is the feedback you get, okay? So just always be mindful of that. In combat, it's happening all the time, okay? It's happening all the time. So one of the ways that we can purposefully deceive our opponent to misunderstand a message so that we can open a line of attack and hit them is by doing a feint, right? So it looks like we're meaning to communicate them or strike them on a high line, and then all of a sudden, right, we go to the low line, all right? I'm giving them a message, I'm going high to draw their attention up, and all of a sudden, as that attention draws up, I go low, okay? So now I'm starting to manipulate communication to suit my needs, okay, in a combative sense, right? But how many of us are doing this involuntarily, unknowingly in daily life? Movement is telling us that we can do this, but are you doing this on a regular basis, right? Some people have a propensity to manipulate people because they want something, okay? Say certain salespeople use manipulative tactics in order to get a sale, right? Which I think is a dirty word, get a sale, right? It should, if you work towards a win-win, you'll have longevity. If you try to get someone, you're not going to have longevity. You're going to also breed distrust, right? Distrust means that customer's never going to come back. They might buy from you once if you're lucky, right? So just something to think about. And then, as part of the communication, we spoke briefly about primal reaction and intelligent response. We all know somebody that when they're communicating with people, they just say whatever is in their mind, right? And they don't think, and it just comes out. The reason for that is because they think and communicate through their unconscious center, their emotional center, Okay, they communicate through the amygdala, which is they're kind of dominant in that space, way they communicate, way they think. So they're very emotive people. But you know that they say what's on their mind, but don't think about it before they say it, because it's emotion that's speaking. If you have ever had or been in a position where you've done that and you landed yourself in some trouble or put your foot in it, we have an obligation then to try and cultivate control around that. Okay, and then we've got to move from that what I would call a primal reaction or primal reactive way of communicating to an intelligent, responsive way of communicating, which means take a breath. Just take a breath, assimilate what's going on, digest that information, right? And then make an informed decision. An informed decision means you take all the information that's happening in that space, put it together, and then balance it out. Are you actually going to say something that's of value, that's actually going to add meaning, value to somebody's life, or is it going to take away from somebody, right? You don't want to be taken away from somebody unless your intention is to cut somebody down because that's what you want to do, or that's what's fitting in that circumstance. But in the most part, if you're just having an amicable conversation or an amenable conversation with someone, it shouldn't be taken away. It's about lifting and giving, right? So we want to try and get into that state. So the idea is when we're working pad drills, for instance, right? So we did some pad drills on Monday. When we're working pad drills and you've got a partner, can I get somebody grab a pair of pads? If you're working with somebody with pads, you're actually implementing and executing communication right there. So we've got this situation here, right? So my opponent's here. I'm just outside the fighting measure, okay? Now if my opponent steps back, okay, I can use that as a way to understand his communication is I'm withdrawing, so that as he starts to contract, Bruce talked about, I expand, right? Then the alternative is he starts to step in, okay? And as he starts to step in, I'm using that as a signal to he's expanding, I'm contracting. So Bruce talks about this philosophy: when my opponent expands, I contract. When my opponent contracts, I expand, okay? But this communication is happening all the time when we're training combative drills. But did you see it as a communication or just hitting some pads? You are constantly communicating. The moment Gerbs starts to step back, he starts to step back. He's communicating to me, he's withdrawing, he's retreating, okay? That's the signal he's given me. I receive that, I acknowledge that, and then I respond, okay? Make sense? So this process of communication is happening inside us all the time. We got to take this communication that's happening and take it to a whole new level so that we can cultivate our ability to communicate, right? Not necessarily in a combative sense, in the sense that people normally construe, thank you by the way, people normally construe combat to be conflict and violence, okay? But actually what we're saying is learn to harmonize with somebody during the conversation, okay? Learn when to respond. Do you respond early? Is it important to respond early? Is somebody, going through a hard time and they're on this slippery spiral and they're, going further and further down? Do you need to intercept that and stop them from spiraling down and bring them back up? Or do you have to wait for somebody to say something meaningful and valuable before you respond? Because if you respond in between, you've just missed a whole bunch of gold, right? Why would you do that, right? So martial artistry is a constant state of communication, and we've got to start to recognize and realize how that communication is in a constant state of flux. And as we start to get better in our martial arts practice, we start to become better at communicating using combative expression, but transcend that combative communication expression to communication in daily life, and start to use the tactics and strategies that you use in the dojo out in real life. All right? Thank you. So